Now we've got all these extra side channels, overhead channels. Our 4K Blu-rays, or whether we're watching on a 4K Blu-ray or if we're streaming it through Vudu or iTunes, are we maxed at 7.1.4? If it is maxed at that, well, like what's embedded in that stream, and if it is at 7.1.4, how does the Trinnov handle this surround information? Is it arraying it or is it discrete? How's it handle that?
Again, it's pretty flexible, but we should probably back up. I wrote an article for Widescreen Review, it was last summer, on object-oriented audio. And if anybody is interested, you can go to Widescreen Review and download it, or contact me and I'll email you the PDF, because this is a fairly detailed conversation. Briefly, there's a fundamental difference which I'm amazed at how widely confused even people in the industry are about this. There's channel-based audio. We're all familiar with it going back to mono, stereo, 5.1, 7.1. And mixers are very comfortable with that. They know that, well, if I want something to appear halfway between the left channel and the center channel, I kind of feed the same thing into both, and phantom imaging will get me to where I want to go. Object-oriented audio doesn't work that way. The object is just a soundtrack. It's the output of, one channel of the mixing board. And it can be any combination of sounds that the sound designer wants. But to keep it simple, let's say it's the sound of a bullet ricocheting. So instead of taking that sound of a bullet ricocheting and moving it from one channel to the next, to the next, to the next, panning it through those channels, what you do is you create the sound of a bullet ricocheting, and then you attach metadata to it. And there are only three pieces of metadata. There's location, which obviously changes over time. So, the bullet can move very fast just by changing its location faster frame to frame in the movie. There's location, there's size, and there's another parameter called diffusion, the flip side of which is focus. So to stay with the bullet ricocheting idea, you have this little sound and it's got information associated with it, and it's moving very quickly from there right past my ear to behind me. And it's this tight little ball of sound size that is also tightly focused. And so it's this tiny little thing that whizzes past my ear and scares me. By comparison, you could also have, say, a crack of lightning and then the thunder that rolls, that starts off, in this direction, and then it just kind of rolls across the valley that you're sitting in as part of the movie. That thunder is still just one thing. It now can be made very large so that it'll be rendered into all of the channels as it kind of rolls past you. But it's just that one thing. They're not putting that sound into each and every speaker and duplicating it. It's a sound with the parameter, in this case, of certain, probably relatively slow motion, but it's also growing and getting very big so as to envelop the entire room before it goes on past you. So in a lot of ways, object-oriented audio is a lot more efficient. Rather than having to put the same information in multiple speakers to create the illusion of size or motion or whatever, you just have the recorded information once, and then some information about what it's doing and how it should do it. And it's the job of a $400 AV receiver or an Altitude 32 to take that metadata and to, based on its understanding of the available burst, to render that sound to the appropriate places. Okay, so that's how object-oriented audio is supposed to work. And by the way, Dolby Atmos, as an example, DTSX is very similar. In Dolby Atmos, the basic 7.1 channels that we're accustomed to thinking of as the bed channels, those are actually audio objects. The difference is that for backwards compatibility reason with older AVRs that maybe don't understand Atmos, those objects never move. They're positioned where you would expect the 7.1 channels to be. They're formatted as objects, but they're backwards compatible with channels. And then you can have, within the bandwidth of a Blu-ray, you can have 15 or 16 objects total. So you can have quite a number of things flying around the room. Where was I going with that? I distracted myself. Oh, I know. Uh, so when we first got, I mentioned earlier that one of the advantages of having a software-based platform is that we don't have to live with some of the stupid decisions that some engineer in Texas might make. So some engineer in Texas decided that 7.1.4, that's plenty. Nobody will want to buy more than that. And everybody except for us was stuck with 7.1.4 for a really long time. In a similar vein, there are some blues that were sort of pre-rendered to a 7.1.4 kind of layout under the same thinking that, well, this is probably plenty. This will be good enough, right? I mean, how many people, how many Shanes are there out there that are going to have, more speakers than that? And Wonder Woman is a famous example of it, and Disney in general, it has been pretty guilty of this, of just, it's still object-oriented audio, but much like the bed channels, the ceiling objects just never move. They put a couple here, a couple there, and they call it a day. And I guess the advantage from their point of view is that it turns it into a channel-like mixing environment, which their sound engineers are already very comfortable with. There are more of them, but it's more of the same thing. Fortunately, partly because people like yourself and people like us have been jumping up and down and screaming, we are seeing fewer and fewer movies being released that have really bastardized the idea of object-oriented audio. And I'm probably giving both you and me too much credit, because the 800-pound gorilla in all of this is Dolby. And Dolby has been extremely proactive about beating up the studios and saying, you are leaving so much really cool stuff on the table if you don't use the tools that we invented for you to use. So Netflix is doing a great job. Amazon Prime, some of the streaming platforms are, Netflix has announced publicly that all of their mixing studios are going to be, the monitoring systems for the studios are going to be at least 9.1.6. And you probably know that they also distribute a lot of content that they themselves did not make. And they are telling people who are producing content to be distributed on Netflix that you have to have at least 7.1.4. And we strongly recommend 9.1.6 in your mixing environment, or else we're just not interested. So thankfully, the good guys at Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV, the Apple TV Plus, we work fairly closely with a lot of these folks, and they get it. It was some of the more traditional, old school studios that took a while to catch on.